welcome to another sewing vlog. It's that time of year when Christmas music gets me through, especially because I fell sick again. Bub goes to childcare, so she brings home fortnightly gifts of illness, and this year has been so bad. I've never been this sick this often in my entire life. Anyway, it's Bub's birthday coming up. I'm not even sure that I'm allowed to call her Bub because she's a toddler and obviously not a baby anymore, but she is in desperate need of some summer clothing. I live in Australia, so Christmas time for us involves a hot summer, and I wanted to sew her something special for her birthday. These are some of the few pieces I sewed for her earlier in the year, which have been really well loved. So I'm going to pick out a few sewing patterns that I already have and use fabric from my stash. I gave away heaps of fabric when I moved, so I've been really intentional in using what I have instead of going out to buy more, which has been a bit of a downer because we all know that fabric shopping is a real highlight of starting any project. You'll see me winging it over the next few minutes as I do have sewing patterns, but my printer isn't set up and my projector isn't set up, so I don't have easy access to the right size for Bub. So I'm also using some of her existing garments to trace around and compare the sizing to those. I recently did some baking for Bub's birthday as well, and I never bake. I don't know if I'll ever bake again because it was such a disaster. I didn't take proper footage of the whole ordeal, but I shared some on my Instagram about the process, so I'll just put up some pics here. The first disaster actually wasn't that much of a baking disaster as it was just a mental health disaster. It was just poor planning. When I was growing up in primary school, it was a thing for kids in Australia to bring something to school to share when it was their birthday. So for example, if it was my birthday, I would bake some cupcakes, or my mum would bake some cupcakes, or maybe buy some chocolates to give everyone in the class to celebrate. So I thought that I would bake some sugar-free, allergen-free carrot cake cupcakes for Bub to bring in to daycare. It was late the night before and I actually nearly ditched the whole idea of baking because I hadn't been to the shops and I didn't even have a muffin tray to bake with, but my husband encouraged me, like the excellent encourager that he is, and he said that he would help me. So reliving this is making me cry, basically. I was going to say it's making me really emotional, but I mean, it is making me emotional, but it's just making me cry. So Tim said that he would help me, and he bought all the ingredients, and he even had to go to a second supermarket to find the muffin tray because the first supermarket didn't have one. We followed a really simple recipe, and then we had to wait ages for them to cool because who knew that half of baking was waiting for stuff to cool so that you could store them properly. Anyway, so it was quite late by the time we got to bed. And the next morning I decorated them and I was quite happy with how they turned out. I arrived at daycare and I took Bub in first because I didn't have baking Tupperware, so I didn't have anything to hold these cupcakes, and I was balancing them on this sort of cake tray and they were just sliding everywhere. So I left them in the car and took Bub in first. And I mentioned to the educators, oh, I've got some cakes in the car, like I'll go bring them in. And they were so lovely, but they basically said, we're really sorry, you can't bring outside food into the daycare. It's just a blanket rule for all families in the daycare because all food is supplied, and they just had kids bringing in random snacks or foods for themselves. And of course there's the allergen risk, but I think mostly it was the fact that people were just bringing in random stuff and they didn't need to do that. So they made this rule where you just can't bring outside food in. And when I heard it, I thought, oh, of course. In my mind, I was like, oh, I knew this was going to happen. But I put on a brave face and I was like, oh, that's fine. Like, I thought that might be the case. That's all right. Don't worry about it. And I just really held the tears in. But I just really wanted to cry. So I dropped Bub off, and as soon as I got into the car, I just burst into tears. And I basically ugly cried all the way home, which It's a little dangerous because I was driving, but I was very, very focused on the road. I was just crying a lot as I was driving. I wasn't angry at the daycare at all. I was actually so angry at myself. I have a history with mental illness, and part of that's having a really critical inner voice and really high expectations for myself. So I was just really angry at myself, especially because I had thought that this might be the case. I thought, oh, maybe you're not allowed to bring things in, because I know that happens in some schools or daycare centers, but I just sort of ignored it. And I guess I was so caught up in really wanting to make Bub's birthday special and wanting for her to be spoiled. For whatever reason, I ignored that feeling or that thought, and I thought, whatever, it'll be fine. It wasn't fine, and I was just so angry that I hadn't listened to myself, and I guess I just felt so inadequate and I felt really stupid. The reason that I was baking them so last minute was because I had been feeling quite low anyway in the lead up, and I'm not a baker and I don't enjoy baking one bit. It had really been a labor of love to try and make something for Bub. So when it was wasted, it just felt like the universe threw that in my face, and all I could hear was the voice in my head just shouting, why did you even bother doing that? You're rubbish at it, and it was so last minute. You just really poorly planned that, and if you'd planned it better, you would have saved yourself this situation. You should have been more prepared. You should have asked the daycare. You should have, you could have found another way to make Bub feel special. So those were all the negative thoughts that were swirling around in my mind, and I've taken a moment to calm down and breathe. Sorry about all the sniffing and congestion. It clearly still makes me emotional retelling what happened. It was just that overwhelming feeling of stuffing up. Anyway, now I can tell you about the second baking disaster story. Yes, there is another one. So I'll try really hard not to choke up, but no promises. I decided to bake Bub's birthday cake for a celebration on the weekend. It's a bit of a tradition, or should I say an expectation in Australia, that mums bake their children's birthday cakes, and there's more awareness now of the unnecessary pressure and stress that it causes, because a lot of parents go all out with decorating these amazing themed cakes, and of course it causes a lot of unnecessary stress. I skipped out of this last year as my friend bakes the most beautiful cakes and she had so generously offered. So this year I thought that I would do it myself as a bit of a rite of passage. And I'm kind of regretting it, kind of not. Anyway, self-development, self-improvement, let's just choose that path for now. I chose a kid-friendly banana cake and I baked it the night before. This time I partly planned ahead because I really needed ripe bananas to get the sweetness. So Tim and I bought a bunch and Tim had them sitting in his car for a few warm days to ripen them up. It worked really well, so take that tip if it helps you. Anyway, the mixing, measuring, I don't know, the baking part was mostly fine, but we didn't have one of those skewer things that you use to test if the middle is cooked. So we used a thin knife and thought that it was done, and you can pretty much see what's coming, can't you? The next day we had family over to celebrate, and when I was getting the cake ready, someone actually pointed out to me that there were butter lumps in the icing, so next time I should melt the butter first before whipping it with the cream cheese. I quietly walked away and burst into tears. Again, in my mind, yes, I feel like that's probably something that you should reserve for yourself and not tell the host of the party who's clearly stressed. And anyway, it was confirmation that what I had done wasn't good enough and that I had somehow failed at this, whole baking a cake thing. And this was moments before we even sang happy birthday, cut the cake, and discovered that the entire inside, well, not the entire, the center, of course, was still raw. Everyone was so lovely about it. I managed to have a quick cry to Tim and pull myself together so that we could sing the song and all that. And honestly, I didn't even care about it being raw at that point because I was mostly still upset slash trying to hold myself together about the previous comment. I am very, very aware of how critical this voice in my head is. But as anyone who has experienced mental illness will know, it's not just a case of being able to change it overnight or even ignore it. I don't place these ridiculous expectations on anyone else. Things like having a clean house or baking a cake for their child, I really wouldn't care less if anyone else did any of these things. But for whatever reason, these past few weeks really brought up a lot of insecurities for me, which I haven't felt in a really long time. Like I said earlier, I really thought that I was at a point in my life where I didn't really care what people thought anymore. But having a child has brought a new season and therefore new expectations into my life. And that clearly plays on my mind, and things bubble over when significant events or big milestones or just a lot of stress comes up. This is something that I've been working on for a long time. Again, especially because I'm a mother now, I want to set a good example of being kind to yourself, to my child, and having a really strong, loving inner voice, which ironically still sets some form of expectation and standard for myself to live up to. I didn't expect this vlog to go in this direction. I actually had some other sewing things and much more light-hearted things to talk about, but mental health and self-development are really big themes in my life that inevitably come up whenever I share things online, so I suppose it was only natural that this was going to happen sooner or later. I also like to think that mental health is a really big part of slow living and living an intentional, conscious life. Being able to know yourself and grow yourself is a really large part of being able to overcome a lot of the stuff that a consumerist world throws at you. So hopefully you enjoyed watching and listening to some of my thoughts on this topic. Let me know what you thought about this style of vlog, and if you'd like to hear more from me about things like this. I hope that if mental illness is part of your life, that you would know that you're not alone and that there are lots of things that can improve and help to slow down in a really good way. If you haven't experienced ill mental health, chances are someone around you is or has, so perhaps hearing my stories can give you a bit of an insight as to some of the struggles or intrusive thoughts that can really make mental illness difficult to override. And sharing these thoughts openly can be really, really difficult. So you could be that listening ear for someone else in their healing. So I'm just finishing off the hems for the t-shirt and the bike shorts on my Juki domestic sewing machine. I don't have a cover stitch machine, which is the one that you usually use to finish hems, so I use the zigzag on the machine that I have, and I think it looks really cute, especially on kids' clothing. Most domestic machines have this part where you can slide out a section around where the needle is, which helps to get really narrow items on, as you can see here. I'm also going to sew on these cute labels that you would have seen me pick out before. I bought these ones from Molly Molly, and I also have some from Kylie and the Machine and their collaboration with DIY Daisy. These are all Australian sewists, so I'll try to remember to link them below. And they aren't really designed to be top stitched on. They're supposed to be attached sort of on the inside in between seams. So I have to iron the edges in because I like having them on show on the outside of garments. I think that they're super cute and they're way too nice to be hidden on the inside. Again, especially for children's clothing. And then they also don't scratch or irritate them on the inside either. The labels kept moving as I was sewing them, so I had to unpick and try again. And even then, because I wasn't using a matching thread, the stitches were really obviously uneven and messy. So I was on a time crunch because I had to leave the house, but I really wanted to finish these. So I quickly unpicked them and I managed to sew them on again, but They were still super messy, and of course I tried to take a shortcut. So instead of unpicking the stitches, I thought, oh, maybe I can just top stitch over the top, but sort of closer to the edge where I wanted the stitches to be, and then I'll unpick the other stitches. Didn't work like that. I ended up having to unpick both sets of stitches and getting quite frustrated.
I need to leave the house at probably 2:40. I should have just stopped and done it properly. Oh, cramp. Done it properly the first time. But do I ever do that? No.
That was another little snapshot into some of the negative self-talk that comes out when I'm under pressure. I still wasn't really happy with how I top stitched that label on, but done is better than perfect, and they'll be ready for Bub to wear on her birthday, so that's a huge win. Of course, I had to take some pics for the gram as well. When I was done, I managed to finish on time and give them a really quick press. I ended up taking the photos another time, but anyway, it's coming to the end of 2023, and it is no doubt going to be a busy season ahead for a lot of people. So I hope that you remember to take care of yourself, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!